I tapped the depth gauge twice with my index finger, a habit I'd developed over years of dives. Not that tapping actually did anything. The digital display was either working or it wasn't. But these little rituals kept me grounded. The pre-dawn light cast everything in shades of blue across the deck of our research vessel as I completed the final systems check on Curiosity, my modified deep-sea submersible. Primary oxygen, green. Backup systems, green. Hull integrity, optimal, I muttered, checking items off my digital tablet. The familiar weight of preparation settled my nerves. This wasn't just another dive. It was the dive I'd spent 3 years of grant writing and theoretical modeling to justify. "Dr. Willis, I've got the latest bathymetric readings," Ernest said, climbing onto the launch platform with his tablet clutched tightly against his chest. His normally neat appearance was slightly disheveled, likely from the all-night preparation session. "The currents are shifting exactly as predicted. We have a perfect window." I nodded, not looking up from my calibrations. "Thanks, Ernest. And please, I've told you a dozen times. Call me Ethan." Ernest cleared his throat, the sound almost lost beneath the gentle slap of waves against the ship's hull. "Ethan, I know you've made up your mind, but I need to voice my concerns again about you going down alone." I finally looked up, meeting his worried gaze. Ernest was the best research assistant I'd ever worked with. Meticulous, brilliant, and unfortunately, extremely cautious. His dark eyes behind those rectangular glasses held the same concern I'd seen for weeks. "We've been over this. Curiosity was designed as a one-person vessel to maximize power efficiency and extend range. 2 people would cut our exploration time by nearly 40%. But if something happens at that depth, nothing's going to happen." I softened my tone, recognizing the genuine worry behind his objections. "Look, I designed Curiosity systems with triple redundancies. If anything fails, 2 backups kick in automatically. The Mariana Outlier isn't even the deepest dive I've attempted." "The Crossroads area has unusual current patterns," Ernest persisted. "The data from the autonomous probe showed exactly why we need to get down there with actual cameras and sensors," I finished for him. "Those patterns are why I believe Sanchez's theories might have merit, despite what the rest of the department thinks." I turned back to the submersible, running my hand along its smooth, white exterior. Curiosity wasn't large, just 12 feet long with a cramped observation sphere. But she represented the pinnacle of deep-sea exploration technology. Her reinforced hull could withstand pressures that would crush conventional submarines, and her propulsion system was nearly silent, minimizing disruption to marine life. "Final systems check complete," I said, changing the subject. "I'm logging optimal conditions with a visibility forecast of 80 feet near surface, dropping to 60 at working depth with the specialized lighting." Ernest nodded reluctantly, knowing the conversation was over. He handed me his tablet. "I've loaded the most recent topographical maps of the trench wall. The Crossroads formation appears stable, but there's an unusual feature here." He pointed to a dark spot on the 3D rendering. That wasn't on previous scans. I studied the anomaly with interest. "Could be a new slide area, or maybe a cave system. I'll check it out if time permits, but the primary mission is to survey the biodiversity around the thermal vents." The sky was lightening from deep blue to pale lavender as I climbed into Curiosity's hatch. The familiar smell of recycled air and electronic components greeted me as I settled into the pilot's seat, connecting my communication equipment. "Radio check," I said after sealing the hatch. "Reading you 5x5, came the ship captain's voice. "Weather holding steady. You're cleared for launch, Dr. Willis." "Launch in 3 minutes," I confirmed, powering up the main systems. Through the clear dome, I watched as the crew cleared the platform. Ernest gave me one final worried look before stepping back. I began my dive log entry, speaking clearly for the recording. Pacific Marine Biology Institute, Mariana Outlier Expedition. Principal Investigator Dr. Ethan Willis, beginning primary descent to survey the newly identified crossroads region. Conditions optimal. Time is 0527 hours. The launch mechanism hummed to life, and I felt the slight jolt as Curiosity was lifted and then lowered into the Pacific. Water rose around the dome, and I watched bubbles cascade across my field of vision as we submerged. The early morning sun created dancing patterns of light that faded as I descended beyond its reach. Passing 100 meters, I reported. All systems nominal. The radio crackled. Confirmed, Dr. Willis. Maintaining position above you. As I descended further, the water darkened to an intense blue, then to a deep indigo, and finally to the absolute black of the deep ocean. I switched on the standard lighting array, illuminating a small sphere around the submersible. Particulate matter drifted through the beam like snow, and occasionally a curious fish would dart through before vanishing back into darkness. Passing 500 meters, pressure hull integrity at 100%. The descent continued smoothly. I kept my eyes alternating between the instrument panel and the view outside. At these depths, the ecosystem changed dramatically. Fewer fish with more specialized adaptations, strange gelatinous creatures that seemed to materialize from nowhere into my light before disappearing again. Approaching 1,000 meters, I announced, preparing to switch to specialized illumination. I reached for a separate control panel. Shannon's pride and joy. Shannon Guzman had spent 2 years developing what she called bio-neutral lighting, a system that provided visibility without triggering the defensive reactions of bioluminescent creatures. The conventional lights we'd used in previous expeditions had limited our observations, as many deep-sea species would either flee from or shut down their natural light displays when exposed to our artificial lights. I powered down the standard lights and activated Shannon's system. The difference was immediate. Instead of harsh white beams cutting through the darkness, a diffuse, slightly bluish illumination spread out from Curiosity. It was almost like moonlight underwater, enough to see by without creating sharp shadows or intense hotspots. Bio-neutral lighting active and functioning perfectly, I noted for the log. Shannon, if you're listening to this recording later, you were right about the dispersal pattern. I smiled, imagining her satisfied expression when she heard that. Shannon never tired of being proven right. As I continued descending toward the crossroads, I kept one eye on the sonar display. The topographical features matched Ernest's maps precisely, until something unusual flashed across the screen. I frowned, adjusting the settings. That's strange. The sonar had picked up movement, large, coordinated movement that didn't match any of the typical deep-sea patterns we'd cataloged. Most creatures at this depth moved slowly to conserve energy, or in predictable patterns when hunting or feeding. This movement was different, purposeful, fast, and large-scale. I reduced my descent rate and adjusted Curiosity's course slightly to investigate, making sure to note the coordinates in the log. Investigating anomalous sonar reading at coordinates 142.19 east, 1134 north, movement pattern doesn't correspond to known species profiles in our database. The thought of Harrison Sanchez crossed my mind. My former mentor had been ridiculed for his theories about large, undiscovered marine species surviving in isolated deep trenches. The scientific community had been particularly harsh after his paper suggesting that some prehistoric marine species might have found refuge in the extreme depths, evolving in isolation over millions of years. I'd been more open to his ideas than most, which had caused tension with my father, the department chair who had ultimately denied Sanchez's tenure. That family drama had nearly derailed my own career before it started. Adjusting course to intercept anomalous reading, I continued in my log.
depth now at 340 meters, reducing speed to minimize acoustic signature. I guided Curiosity with gentle movements, not wanting to announce my presence too loudly. Many deep-sea creatures were extraordinarily sensitive to vibrations. The sonar continued to show the unusual movement, now more defined. Whatever I was tracking was circling something on the seafloor.
As I drew closer, the sonar image became clearer, and I felt my breath catch. The object, no, the creature, was massive. I quickly calculated based on the sonar return. Contact appears to be approximately 60 to 70 feet in length, I said, my voice steady despite my rising excitement, moving in a circular pattern around what appears to be possibly a whale fall. Whale falls, the carcasses of whales that sink to the ocean floor, were rare but important events in deep-sea ecology, providing nutrients for hundreds of species in the food-poor depths. They were scientific gold mines, but I'd never seen predatory activity around one of this magnitude. I activated the external cameras and adjusted the bio-neutral lighting to its maximum range. The water ahead remained dark, but the sonar indicated I was getting close. Then, at the edge of visibility, I saw movement, a massive shadow circling just beyond the range of clear sight. I carefully maneuvered Curiosity closer, fighting to keep my hands steady on the controls. The shape moved with fluid grace, its outline becoming more distinct with each passing second. "This can't be," I whispered, forgetting momentarily that I was recording. As the creature turned toward me, the lights finally revealed its full form. The broad, blunt snout, the massive pectoral fins, the distinctive shape of the dorsal fin, the rows of teeth visible even at this distance when it opened its mouth to tear at the whale carcass. I was looking at a living, breathing megalodon, a prehistoric shark species thought extinct for over 2 million years. It was impossible. It defied everything we knew about marine biology and evolution. My hands moved automatically, activating every recording system on Curiosity. High-definition video, spectrum analysis, water sampling, acoustic recording, everything. I am observing what appears to be a living specimen of Otodus megalodon, I stated for the record, my scientific training taking over despite my shock. Approximately 65 feet in length, actively feeding on a whale carcass at 1 to 350 meters depth in the crossroads region of the Mariana Outlier. I stared transfixed as the massive shark continued its feeding, seemingly unaware or unconcerned by my presence. Every movement, every detail of its body structure matched the theoretical models based on fossil records, with some adaptations that likely reflected its deepwater habitat. This single discovery would rewrite textbooks. It would validate Sanchez's theories and transform our understanding of deep-sea ecosystems and evolutionary isolation. As I watched the prehistoric giant circle back toward the carcass, I knew that marine biology would never be the same after today. I held my breath as I watched the massive prehistoric creature tear methodically through the whale carcass. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the external camera controls, making sure every second of this historic discovery was being recorded. The megalodon, an actual living megalodon, moved with a primal efficiency that no modern shark could match. The bio-neutral lighting system cast just enough illumination to capture the scene without disturbing the ancient predator. I needed to get closer. This opportunity was too valuable to waste observing from a conservative distance. "Come on, girl," I whispered to Curiosity as I eased the thrusters forward. The submersible responded with a gentle surge, closing the gap between us and the feeding shark. I kept my movements minimal, careful not to create sudden changes in the water pressure that might alert the creature to my presence. At this new vantage point, I could make out details I'd missed before. The megalodon's skin wasn't the uniform gray I'd expected based on great white anatomy. Instead, It showed a darker coloration along the dorsal surface that gradually lightened toward the belly, countershading taken to its evolutionary extreme. The effectiveness of this camouflage in the deep ocean made perfect sense. Prey looking up would struggle to distinguish the lighter underbelly against the faint light from above, while those looking down would lose the darker back against the depths. I activated the submersible's measurement tools, running a laser scan across the massive body. The readout confirmed my initial estimate, 64 feet, 7 inches from snout to tail. The sheer scale of the animal was difficult to comprehend even as I watched it. Modern great whites typically maxed out around 20 feet, making this creature more than 3 times that size. Logging observation at 0723 hours, I said into my recorder. Subject continues systematic feeding behavior on what appears to be a juvenile humpback carcass. Feeding pattern shows remarkable efficiency compared to modern lamniforms. Rather than the exploratory bite and retreat pattern observed in great whites, this specimen employs a methodical sectioning technique, using its serrated dentition to remove large portions of flesh before consumption. I zoomed in on the creature's massive jaws, counting rows of teeth where visible. The distinctive triangular shape of each tooth, some appearing to be nearly 7 inches along the exposed edge, was exactly as the fossil record had shown. But seeing them in action, watching as they sliced through blubber and muscle with such precision, was something else entirely. The specimen shows distinctive scarring along the dorsal ridge, I continued, focusing the camera on the marks that ran like pale streaks across the shark's back. These appear to be healed injuries, possibly from intraspecies conflict or mating behavior. If other specimens exist in this ecosystem, these markings could indicate territorial or reproductive competition. I adjusted the submersible's position again, trying to capture footage of the creature's gills. The 5 gill slits on each side pulsed with hypnotic rhythm as they extracted oxygen from the water. Their efficiency must be extraordinary to support such a massive body in these cold, high-pressure depths. The discovery of a living megalodon raises fundamental questions about deep-sea isolation and evolutionary stasis, I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. This specimen suggests that certain deep-water ecosystems may function as evolutionary refugia, allowing prehistoric species to persist unchanged for millions of years. Sanchez was right. I thought of my mentor's face when he would see this footage. After years of ridicule from the scientific community for his theories about living fossil species in the deep trenches, this single discovery would vindicate everything he'd proposed. My scientific reverie was interrupted when I noticed something odd. The megalodon had stopped feeding. The massive shark hung motionless in the water, no longer tearing at the whale carcass. Something had changed. Subject has ceased feeding activity, I noted, adjusting the camera to capture this behavioral shift. Time is 0741. No obvious external stimulus for the change in... The enormous head began to turn, slowly and deliberately, away from the carcass and toward me. Those eyes, ancient, black, and utterly cold, nothing like the expressive eyes of dolphins or the curious gaze of modern sharks. These were the eyes of something that had been perfecting the art of predation since before humans existed, and they were fixed directly on my submersible. Subject appears to have detected the vessel, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper despite the fact that sound couldn't travel between us. My scientific brain scrambled to understand what was happening, even as alarm bells started ringing in my mind. Possibly sensing electromagnetic field generated by Curiosity's systems. The megalodon's pectoral fins adjusted slightly, changing its orientation in the water. No longer parallel to the submersible, it now faced me directly. The movement was subtle but unmistakable in its intent. Initiating controlled withdrawal, I said, my fingers moving to the thruster controls. Subject showing increased interest in the vessel. maintaining observation while creating distance. I eased the submersible backward, trying to move slowly enough not to trigger a predatory response. But the moment curiosity began to retreat, something changed in the megalodon's posture. Its massive body tensed, and those cold eyes seemed to focus with terrifying intensity. "Shit," I muttered, abandoning protocol as I realized what was happening. The movement of my submersible away from the carcass had triggered something primal in the prehistoric predator, a territorial response, or worse, a perception of me as competition for its food. I pushed the thrusters to a higher setting, no longer concerned with subtle movements. The submersible picked up speed, backing away from both the carcass and the increasingly alert megalodon. Too late. The massive shark surged forward with a speed that seemed impossible for its size. One moment it was hanging in the water 30 yards away. The next it was hurtling toward me like a freight train. "Emergency evasive maneuver," I shouted, yanking the controls to send Curiosity into a steep ascent. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought I might clear the charging predator. The impact came with crushing force. The megalodon slammed into the lower section of the submersible, sending me flying against my restraints. My head cracked against the side panel, and a burst of stars filled my vision. Warning lights flashed across the console as Curiosity spun through the water. "Mayday, Mayday." I gasped into the communication system, fighting to regain control of the vessel. "Research vessel Curiosity under attack at coordinates." The stabilization system kicked in, stopping the wild spinning. As my vision cleared, I saw multiple red indicators flashing across the control panel. Hull integrity was compromised in 2 sections. The primary propulsion system was damaged, leaving me with only auxiliary power. Through the viewport, I could see nothing but swirling sediment kicked up by the impact and the submersible's erratic movement. I switched to the external cameras, desperately trying to locate the megalodon. The sediment cloud parted, and my blood turned to ice. The massive shark had completed a wide turn and was now circling back toward Curiosity. Its approach was different this time. Slower, more deliberate, like a predator that knew its prey was injured and had nowhere to run. Those ancient black eyes fixed on my vessel with what I could only interpret as hungry intent. My fingers flew across the emergency controls, trying to coax more power from the auxiliary systems. But Curiosity responded sluggishly, damaged from the first impact. The distance between us and the approaching megalodon closed with terrifying speed. The megalodon charged toward Curiosity like a freight train. I yanked the emergency thruster controls, but the damaged system responded with painful sluggishness. The massive shark slammed into the submersible's port side with bone-jarring force, sending me flying across the cabin. My shoulder crashed against the opposite wall, pain shooting down my arm. "Come on, come on." I twisted back toward the controls, fingers flying across the propulsion system interface. Warning indicators flashed across the screen. Primary propulsion offline. Auxiliary power at 64%. Hull integrity compromised in 3 sections. I pulled up the damage assessment diagram. The first impact had crushed part of the lower hull, and this new hit had buckled the port side. If the shark kept this up, I wouldn't last long. I tried rerouting power to the damaged thruster arrays, watching the system diagnostics crawl across the screen. The shark circled back, its massive form appearing again on the external camera feed. Even in my desperate situation, the scientist in me couldn't help noticing how it moved. Nothing like modern sharks. The megalodon's muscular body cut through the water with terrifying precision, its movements calculated and deliberate. "Not now, not like this," I muttered, punching in emergency override codes. The system beeped, accepting the command. For a second, I felt a surge of hope. Then the megalodon rammed Curiosity again. The impact threw me forward, my forehead smacking against the control panel. Something warm trickled down my face. Blood. The cabin lights flickered, then stabilized. More red warnings populated my screen. Hull integrity critical in Section 2B. Oxygen recycling system functioning at 87%. I reached for the emergency beacon controls, flipping the protective cover and hitting the activation switch. A steady pulse on the communications panel confirmed it was transmitting. "Mayday, Mayday," I said into the comm system, not knowing if my message would reach the surface. "This is Dr. Ethan Willis, in Research Submersible Curiosity, under attack by—" I paused, the absurdity of what I was about to say hitting me despite the danger. "Under attack by a living megalodon specimen at coordinates already transmitted. Hull compromised, requesting immediate assistance. Jerome would be monitoring communications, but according to our dive protocol, he wouldn't expect regular check-ins for at least another 3 hours. By then, it might be too late." I wiped blood from my eye and tried the emergency thrusters again. This time they responded, pushing the submersible in a slow, awkward ascent. The depth gauge showed we were rising, but at a fraction of normal speed, too slow to escape. The sonar pinged, showing the megalodon circling around for another pass. I braced myself, gripping the seat restraints. The impact, when it came, hit the underside of Curiosity. Metal screamed. The entire submersible rolled, sending tools and equipment flying through the cabin. Something struck my ribs, forcing the air from my lungs. The lights went out completely for several seconds before the emergency system kicked in, bathing everything in dim red. The main console flickered, rebooted, and displayed a catastrophic system failure cascade. External cameras offline. Primary life support switched to backup. Hull breach detected in Section 3C. Emergency seals engaged. I was now effectively blind except for sonar. The 3D display showed the megalodon's massive signature moving away slightly, circling at about 50 meters distance. I recognized the behavior immediately from years studying modern shark predation patterns. It wasn't retreating. It was preparing for a killing attack. "Think, Ethan, think," I whispered, scanning the emergency protocols on the manual panel. I pulled up the ballast controls. If I couldn't move horizontally, maybe I could drop some weight and gain buoyancy. I purged one of the forward ballast tanks, feeling the submersible shudder and tilt upward slightly. The depth gauge showed we were rising again, but painfully slowly. The megalodon's sonar signature changed direction, moving in a tighter circle. It was exactly what I'd seen in white shark hunting behavior, but scaled up to this prehistoric monster's proportions. The next hit would likely be decisive. I checked the oxygen levels. Still stable, but that wouldn't matter if the hull gave way completely. Water pressure at this depth would crush me instantly if the cabin was breached. I pulled up the structural integrity display, watching the red warning zones expand across the schematic of Curiosity's hull. With shaking hands, I activated the audio log system. If nothing else, someone should know what happened here. "This is Dr. Ethan Willis, recording from Curiosity at approximately 1,350 meters depth in the Mariana Outlier region," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've encountered and confirmed the existence of a living megalodon, approximately 65 feet in length. The specimen has attacked my submersible, causing critical damage. I've activated the emergency beacon, but—" I swallowed hard. "I don't expect rescue will arrive in time. The subject is displaying typical apex predator hunting behavior, circling at what I estimate to be killing distance. For the record, this discovery confirms Dr. Sanchez's theories about deep-sea evolutionary refugia. The specimen appears to be a mature adult, possibly female based on size estimations, and displays hunting tactics consistent with but more sophisticated than modern lamniform sharks. The sonar pinged more rapidly as the megalodon turned directly toward Curiosity. I tensed, preparing for what might be the final impact. This may be my final observation. The specimen is now. The sonar display suddenly changed, showing new massive biological signatures approaching rapidly from the southeast. 3 separate readings, each almost as large as the megalodon itself. The megalodon's signature abruptly altered course. Instead of charging toward me, it veered away, its pattern changing from attack to what appeared to be defensive positioning. I stared at the sonar display, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The new signatures were moving with purpose, directly toward the megalodon's position. They weren't random deep-sea creatures. They were heading straight for the giant shark with what looked like coordinated movement. The megalodon's attack pattern immediately changed. It abandoned its circling of my submersible, turning to face the newcomers. On the sonar, I watched as the prehistoric predator, moments ago the most terrifying force in these depths, now positioned itself defensively against the approaching entities. I stared at the sonar screen, my mouth hanging open as the new biological signatures moved with unmistakable purpose. These weren't random deep-sea creatures stumbling into the area. No, these massive entities, nearly as large as the megalodon itself, moved with the disciplined precision of coordinated hunters. "That's impossible," I whispered, wiping more blood from my eye with the back of my hand. The sonar display showed the 3 new signatures spreading out in a wide arc, cutting off the megalodon's escape route to the deeper waters. Each measured between 45 and 55 feet, slightly smaller than the megalodon but still colossal by any modern standard. I watched as 2 more signatures appeared from beyond the sonar's edge, then a 6th, completing what looked eerily like a hunting party. My brain, despite the throbbing pain from my injuries, made the connection almost immediately. I'd spent years studying the fossil record of marine megafauna. The size, movement patterns, and behavior I was witnessing matched perfectly with Livyatan melville, the prehistoric sperm whale that had evolved specifically to hunt creatures like the megalodon. "They can't be alive, too," I said to myself, voice cracking as I fumbled for my notebook with shaking hands. First a living megalodon and now Livyatan? It's not possible. But the evidence was right in front of me. I scribbled frantically in my notebook, labeling the largest signature as Alpha as it moved ahead of the others. The creature's sonar return was massive, easily 55 feet long with a cranial cavity significantly larger than modern sperm whales. My hasty diagram showed the pod's movement pattern, a classic pincer formation designed to trap prey between multiple attackers. The Alpha signature suddenly accelerated, moving with shocking speed directly toward the megalodon. I held my breath, eyes locked on the sonar as the 2 titans converged. When they collided, I didn't need instruments to feel the impact. A pressure wave rippled through the water, hitting Curiosity with enough force to make the entire submersible shudder. Tools that had been floating in the cabin slammed against the port wall. "My God," I breathed, steadying myself against the console. I checked the depth gauge, 3,240 feet. We drifted significantly deeper during the initial megalodon attack. The submersible was trying to rise on its emergency systems, but the ascent was painfully slow. At this rate, it would take hours to reach a safe retrieval depth, assuming the hull held together that long. The other Livyatan signatures executed their plan with what I could only describe as tactical intelligence. 2 smaller members of the pod, still enormous at 45 feet each, split off to flank the megalodon while the rest maintained their blocking position. The coordination was uncanny, suggesting these creatures possessed social hunting behaviors far more advanced than I would have expected from the fossil record alone. I tried to imagine what was happening beyond the limited data on my screen. These massive whales would have powerful echolocation abilities, likely communicating with each other through complex vocalizations. The Megalodon, despite its size and power, was a solitary hunter facing a coordinated team. "They're working together," I said, recording observations as rapidly as I could. "The pod is isolating the Megalodon using classic cetacean hunting tactics, just scaled up to an almost unimaginable size." I switched to the remaining functional external microphone, hoping to capture some audio evidence of their communication. What came through was a series of powerful clicks and low-frequency pulses that made the speaker crackle. These sounds were similar to modern sperm whale vocalizations, but with patterns I'd never heard before, more complex and varied. On the sonar display, I watched as two of the Leviathan moved in perfect synchronization, appearing to distract the Megalodon from its front side, while a third member of the pod accelerated from below in a classic ambush maneuver. The impact was violent enough that my instruments picked up the pressure disturbance. The Megalodon wasn't going down without a fight. Its sonar signature twisted with shocking agility for something so massive, and it appeared to land a punishing bite on one of the flanking Leviathan. The injured whale's movement pattern changed immediately, its signature pulling back from the main engagement. "The Megalodon scored a hit," I narrated into my recorder, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pain in my shoulder and head. "Leviathan number 3 is retreating. Movement pattern suggests serious injury. But the pod isn't backing off. They're adjusting their formation." A second Leviathan took a hit minutes later. The sonar showed the Megalodon executing a lightning-fast turn that must have brought its massive jaws into contact with another attacker. The second injured whale didn't retreat completely, but its movement became noticeably erratic. Despite landing these powerful blows, the Megalodon was clearly outmatched. The remaining Leviathan tightened their formation, with the Alpha now positioning itself directly above the shark. Modern sperm whales were known to use their massive heads as battering rams, and I suspected I was witnessing the prehistoric version of this tactic. My submersible continued to drift helplessly in this underwater battlefield. The emergency thrusters were still functioning just enough to provide minimal control, but with primary propulsion offline, I was essentially at the mercy of the currents and dangerously close to the fighting titans. "Need to put more distance between us," I muttered, trying again to coax more power from the auxiliary systems. The controls responded sluggishly, and the submersible began to move at an agonizing crawl away from the conflict zone. I didn't make it far enough. The sonar showed the Megalodon, now completely surrounded, making increasingly desperate movements. Its signature whipped violently as it fought to break through the Leviathan blockade. One particularly powerful movement, what I guessed was a lateral strike with its tail, missed its intended Leviathan target completely. Instead, it hit Curiosity. The impact was catastrophic. One moment I was hunched over the sonar display, and the next I was flying across the cabin as the submersible spun violently through the water. I had no time to brace myself before my head slammed against the viewport with a sickening crack. White-hot pain exploded behind my eyes, and my vision narrowed to a tunnel. The cabin alarms, already blaring from previous damage, somehow grew even more insistent. New warning indicators flashed across screens, showing hull integrity had been compromised in yet another section. The viewport itself now displayed a spiderweb of tiny cracks, not yet breaching but severely compromised. Blood trickled into my right eye again, but I could barely lift my arm to wipe it away. The spinning gradually slowed as the stabilization system struggled to compensate. I fought to stay conscious, focusing on the sonar display that somehow remained functional. Through my dazed vision, I watched the brutal spectacle continuing to unfold in the depths. The Leviathan pod had closed in completely, surrounding the Megalodon in a tight circle. The prehistoric shark's movements were becoming less coordinated, its attacks less precise. The Alpha Leviathan executed another ramming attack, its signature driving directly into the megalodon's midsection. The battle was reaching its conclusion. Despite its injuries, the pod maintained overwhelming pressure on the megalodon. I watched through increasingly blurry vision as the coordinated assault continued. The prehistoric shark that had nearly killed me was now fighting for its own survival against the only natural predator that could challenge it. My consciousness began to fade, the pain in my head overwhelming my senses. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the sonar signature of the megalodon, surrounded on all sides, making one final desperate attempt to break through the Leviathan blockade. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision as pain radiated from where my head had struck the viewport. Blood trickled into my left eye, making it even harder to see what was happening outside Curiosity. The cabin spun around me, but I forced myself to focus on the lone exterior light still functioning after the megalodon's tail had struck us. Through the murky beam, I watched the largest Leviathan, the one I'd labeled Alpha, charge directly at the megalodon's vulnerable gill region. Its massive head slammed into the shark's side with terrible precision. The impact sent vibrations through the water that I could feel inside the submersible's damaged hull. "Oh my God," I whispered, fumbling for the voice recorder. My fingers felt thick and uncoordinated, but I managed to press the button. Continuing observation at... I squinted at the digital clock on the console. The numbers swam before my eyes. Unknown time. The Alpha Leviathan has targeted the megalodon's gill slits. 2 others are positioning beneath the shark, likely to prevent downward escape. The water around the battling leviathans began to cloud with dark billows that even the weak exterior light revealed clearly. Blood. So much blood that it created a visible haze in the beam of my light. Blood dispersal pattern suggests major arterial damage, I continued, my voice shaking as I tried to maintain scientific detachment. The megalodon is bleeding profusely from what appears to be... I winced as a sharp pain shot through my head. From what appears to be multiple wounds to the gill region and possibly the abdominal cavity. On the sonar display, I could see the megalodon's signature making increasingly erratic movements. The massive shark twisted and thrashed, but its movements lacked the coordinated power I'd observed earlier. Each desperate turn seemed weaker than the last. I pressed my palm against the viewport, leaving a smear of my own blood on the glass as I leaned closer. Subject's defensive movements are becoming disorganized, likely experiencing significant blood loss and oxygen deprivation. The Leviathan pod moved with chilling precision. While the Alpha held the megalodon's attention at the front, 2 others positioned themselves directly beneath the shark. On the sonar, I watched their signatures align in what could only be a coordinated attack formation. "They're communicating," I whispered into the recorder, displaying complex hunting behaviors that suggest highly evolved social structures and tactical planning, far beyond what we've documented in modern cetaceans. What happened next occurred with such synchronized violence that I gasped aloud. All 3 Leviathan charged simultaneously, the Alpha driving forward into the megalodon's head, while the 2 below rammed upward into its underbelly. The impact was so powerful that my damaged submersible rocked from the pressure wave. The megalodon's body convulsed violently, its massive tail whipping through the water in what looked like involuntary spasms rather than deliberate movements. I watched, transfixed, as the prehistoric shark's struggles weakened and then, with one final shudder, went completely still. Terminal event at approximately... I checked the timestamp on the sonar recording. 0822 hours. Subject appears to have succumbed to its injuries following a coordinated attack by multiple Leviathan specimens. My voice sounded distant to my own ears as I continued to document what I was witnessing. The scientific part of my brain worked automatically, while another part screamed about the impossibility of what I was seeing. Prehistoric apex predators, thought extinct for millions of years, battling in the depths of the Pacific. Curiosity drifted helplessly on minimal emergency power. The damage to the propulsion system was complete. I had no control over our movement. The emergency thrusters had gone offline completely after that last impact. Now we were just another piece of debris in the deep, carried by the subtle currents. Through the viewport, I watched as the victorious Leviathan pod began to feed. They tore into the megalodon's carcass with methodical efficiency, their massive jaws easily ripping through muscle and cartilage that would have been impenetrable to almost any other predator. The scene was primal and viscerally disturbing, yet I couldn't look away. Pod feeding behavior appears hierarchical, I noted, trying to keep my voice steady. The alpha has claimed the anterior region, while subordinates feed at... The words died in my throat as I noticed something on the sonar display. 2 of the Leviathan signatures had broken away from the feeding group. They were moving in a direct path toward my submersible. 2 specimens have disengaged from feeding activity. I whispered into the recorder. They appear to be approaching this vessel. Unclear if this represents curiosity or predatory intent. I held my breath as the 2 massive creatures came into view through my limited field of vision. They were even more terrifying up close, each nearly 50 feet long, with bulbous heads housing what I knew must be the largest brains of any predator in Earth's history. Their bodies were dark, with subtle countershading visible even in the weak light. Unlike the sleek, streamlined form of the megalodon, these creatures had the robust, almost rectangular head structure typical of sperm whales, but with jaws that seemed proportionally larger, lined with conical teeth the size of my forearm. They circled Curiosity once, moving with deliberate slowness. I remained absolutely still, though rationally I knew they could detect my presence regardless of my movement. Modern sperm whales possessed the most powerful biological sonar known to science. These creatures, their prehistoric ancestors or cousins, likely had similar capabilities. As if confirming my thoughts, the Leviathan directly in front of the viewport opened its massive jaws slightly and emitted a series of clicks so powerful I could see the water vibrate in the beam of my exterior light. The sound penetrated the damaged hull of my submersible and hit me like physical blows. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did little good. The clicks reverberated inside my skull, causing spikes of pain that made me cry out. They're scanning me, I gasped into the recorder between pulses. Using echolocation to determine what I am. The sonar clicks continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. I curled forward in my seat. Hands still pressed futilely against my ears as the painful sound seemed to penetrate every cell in my body. The instrument panel vibrated with each pulse. Warning lights flickered as the sound waves interfered with Curiosity's electrical systems. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sonic assault stopped. I slowly lowered my hands from my ears, watching the sonar display through blurred vision. The 2 Leviathan had stopped their circling. For several tense moments, they hovered near the submersible, their massive bodies casting shadows that swallowed what little light remained. Then they turned and began moving away, back toward their pod. They're leaving, I whispered in disbelief. They've dismissed the submersible as non-threatening, or perhaps not worth the effort compared to their current meal. I slumped back in my seat, suddenly aware of how tightly my muscles had been clenched. A wave of relief washed over me, followed immediately by the stark reality of my situation. I might have escaped becoming prey to prehistoric whales, but I was far from safe. With shaking hands, I pulled up the system diagnostics on the main console. The results confirmed what I already suspected. Propulsion was completely dead, not just damaged. Communications showed severe compromise. The primary array was offline, and the backup was operating at minimal capacity, likely not strong enough to penetrate to the surface from this depth. Most concerning was the power situation. The emergency batteries were draining at a rate approximately 15% faster than they should have been. I ran the calculations twice to be sure, but the conclusion was unavoidable. Life support systems analysis. I spoke into the recorder, trying to keep my voice clinical. Current power drain indicates approximately 72 hours of life support remaining if I implement immediate conservation protocols. Temperature control will need to be minimized. Non-essential systems powered down. Limited use of exterior lights. Outside the viewport, the Leviathan continued their feast, methodically reducing the once mighty Megalodon to pieces. They seemed completely unbothered by my presence now, having determined I was insignificant. I watched them work, these impossible creatures from Earth's distant past, while calculating the dwindling hours of air I had left. I watched the massive shapes of the Leviathan pod through my one functioning exterior light as they methodically stripped flesh from the Megalodon carcass. The blood cloud expanded around them, occasionally drifting past Curiosity's viewport, turning my small world momentarily red. My head throbbed where I'd struck it against the viewport, and dried blood had crusted along my temple and cheek. The main console flickered, and several screens went dark without warning. I lunged forward, ignoring the pain shooting through my shoulder, and quickly assessed what remained functional. Life support indicators showed stable oxygen recycling but critically low power reserves. The hull integrity warnings pulsed in angry red patterns across the secondary display. 72 hours, I muttered, remembering my earlier calculation. Need to make it count. I pulled up the power management interface and began shutting down everything non-essential. The external cameras went first, except for the single functioning light and its associated camera. Next, I disabled the climate control system, keeping only minimal air circulation. The cabin would get colder, but I could manage that. The internal lighting I reduced to emergency levels, just enough to see the controls and write. Finally, I shut down all scientific instruments except the sonar, which I needed to track potential threats or rescuers. With each system I disabled, I watched the power consumption graph drop incrementally. When I finished, I'd extended life support from 72 hours to nearly 96, assuming no further complications. I knew Jerome would follow protocol if I missed my scheduled check-in, but that still left a narrow margin for rescue. The console flickered again, and the main computer system crashed with a series of warning beeps. My heart sank as I tried to restart it, but the boot sequence failed repeatedly. The data recording systems, containing all my footage of both the Megalodon and the Leviathan pod, were now inaccessible. No, I whispered, trying different restart sequences with increasing desperation. After 20 minutes of failed attempts, I reached for my waterproof backpack stored beneath the pilot's seat and retrieved a leather-bound notebook and pencil. Old school, but reliable. I opened to a fresh page and began documenting everything I could remember about both species, their behaviors, and the hunt I'd witnessed. I sketched the Megalodon's distinctive scarring pattern, the Leviathan's hunting formation, and detailed notes on their communication patterns. If the digital data couldn't be recovered, at least this analog record might survive. For the next several hours, I alternated between writing observations and watching the Leviathan pod through the viewport. They fed with surprising delicacy for creatures of their size, using their teeth to pry off manageable sections of flesh. The Alpha maintained its position at the head of the carcass, occasionally emitting low-frequency pulses that seemed to maintain the feeding hierarchy. By hour 5 of my drift, the carcass had been reduced to little more than a skeleton. The smallest Leviathan, which I designated juvenile in my notes, was the first to depart. It circled the remains once, then turned and swam into the darkness, its massive silhouette fading from view. 2 others followed shortly after, swimming in a different direction. "They're splitting up," I noted in my book. "Possible territorial behavior, post-feeding." The alpha and the 2 remaining pod members continued to pick at what little remained of the megalodon. One of them, the individual I'd seen injured during the fight, moved with a noticeable list to one side. Despite this, it seemed capable of swimming effectively. The remaining flesh disappeared over the next hour until only bones remained, scattered across the seafloor below. The alpha was the last to leave. It approached my submersible once more, hovering just beyond the reach of my light. Its massive eye, easily the size of a dinner plate, seemed to study me with unnerving intelligence. It opened its jaws and emitted a series of clicks that vibrated through Curiosity's hull. Then, with a powerful thrust of its tail, it turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me truly alone. I checked the time. 6 hours and 17 minutes since the megalodon attack had begun. The battery indicator showed power at 68%, declining at a steady rate that confirmed my earlier calculations. I needed to conserve every watt. I turned my attention to the emergency beacon. Its indicator light pulsed weakly, suggesting the transmission was operating but at minimal strength. With the Leviathan pod gone, I needed to maximize my chances of detection. I pulled up the power routing interface on the secondary system and studied it for several minutes, tracing power pathways with my finger across the screen. "If I route power from the remaining external lights," I said to myself, tapping commands into the console, "I can boost the beacon signal by approximately 30%. The single exterior light that had been my window to the outside world flickered and died, plunging everything beyond the viewport into absolute darkness. The beacon status indicator strengthened from yellow to green, confirming the successful power transfer. I slumped back in my seat and winced as pain shot through my shoulder. For the first time since the attack, I had a moment to properly assess my injuries. My head wound had stopped bleeding but felt tender and swollen to the touch. My shoulder wasn't dislocated but had limited range of motion, suggesting a moderate sprain. I reached for the emergency medical kit stored under the console and found antiseptic wipes, painkillers, and a compression bandage. After cleaning my head wound and swallowing 2 pain tablets, I methodically inventoried every resource available to me. The emergency rations consisted of 6 nutrient-dense food bars and 4 liters of water. The medical kit contained basic supplies, but nothing for major trauma. The emergency oxygen system was operating at 92% efficiency. Most critically, the battery power continued its slow decline despite my conservation efforts. I opened my notebook again and made a new entry. Current status assessment. Submersible power at 65%. Oxygen recyclers functioning at 92% efficiency. Hull integrity compromised but stable. Personal injuries. Head laceration, minor. Shoulder sprain, moderate. If Jerome follows protocol, search operations will begin at approximately 1200 hours tomorrow. Rescue window, 48 hours from now. Life support window, approximately 94 hours. Margin for error, 46 hours. The math was both reassuring and terrifying. I had enough life support to survive, but with little room for complications. I checked the depth gauge, 3,105 feet. Curiosity had risen slightly since the attack, but remained well beyond any hope of surface ascent without power. The temperature in the cabin had already dropped noticeably. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face, and my fingers felt stiff as I continued writing. I reached for the emergency supply compartment and pulled out 2 thermal blankets, wrapping one around my shoulders and saving the other for when it got colder. With nothing else to do, I decided to preserve my oxygen by sleeping. I reclined the pilot's seat as far as it would go, which wasn't much, and wrapped the thermal blanket tightly around myself. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by the occasional creak of the hull or the persistent throbbing in my head. When I woke, the cabin was significantly colder. The display showed 8 hours had passed, and power had dropped to 57%. I spent the next hour trying to access the corrupted data storage system, managing to retrieve fragments of video and sonar recordings. Most were too damaged to be useful, but I found 37 seconds of clear footage showing the Megalodon's initial approach to Curiosity. I transferred this to a backup storage drive and powered down the system again to save energy. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of sleep, note-taking, and periodic system checks. The temperature continued to drop until it hovered just above freezing. I used both thermal blankets now, one wrapped around my body and the other around my head and shoulders. My breath formed thick clouds with each exhale, and condensation froze in delicate patterns on the interior of the viewport. I rationed the food bars carefully, allowing myself half a bar every 12 hours, along with small sips of water. Hunger became a constant companion, but more troubling was the growing sense of claustrophobia. The darkness outside the viewport seemed to press in on me, broken only by the dim glow of the emergency lights. The silence was absolute except for my breathing and the occasional ping of the sonar. On what my calculations indicated was the second day of my ordeal. I woke from a fitful sleep to a new sound. A faint, rhythmic ping echoed through the hull, different from the normal sounds of the submersible. I sat up quickly, ignoring the stiffness in my cold, numbed limbs, and checked the sonar display. The screen showed distant contacts, too regular to be natural. My heart leaped as I recognized the pattern of active sonar sweeps, the kind used by search vessels. I reached for the emergency beacon controls and confirmed it was still transmitting at maximum strength. Then the sonar picked up something else. Among the distant pings of what I hoped were rescue vessels, there was a different signature, larger, biological, and moving in a deliberate pattern approximately 2 miles to the east of my position. The signature was massive, comparable to the Leviathan. I stared at the display, my breath fogging the screen as I leaned closer. The signal could be rescue, or it could be another prehistoric predator. All I could do was wait and see which would reach me first. I jerked awake to the sound of mechanical humming vibrating through the hull. My stiff neck protested as I straightened up in the pilot's seat. I'd fallen asleep slumped against the control panel, my body finally giving in after fighting exhaustion for— how long had it been now? The chronometer showed I'd been trapped for nearly 53 hours. The humming grew louder, not part of Curiosity's systems, which had gone mostly silent as power dwindled. This was external, something mechanical, moving. My hands, numb from the cold, fumbled across the darkened console. I'd shut down nearly everything to extend life support, leaving the cabin in near darkness. Only the sonar display still glowed with a weak green light, showing battery levels at a critical 12%, just enough for a few more hours of oxygen recycling. After that, I squinted at the sonar. There, a signature approaching from above. Not biological. Too regular in shape. Too deliberate in movement. "Please be rescue," I whispered, my voice cracking from dehydration. Not another research vessel about to get a front-row seat to my corpse. I leaned closer to the display, tracking the object's descent. It was moving in a controlled pattern, a search grid. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't random. They were looking for something. Looking for me. The signature paused directly overhead, hovering about 50 meters above Curiosity. I needed to get their attention before they moved on. The emergency beacon had been transmitting, but with power so low, I couldn't be sure how strong the signal remained. I scanned the darkened control panel, looking for anything I could use, Most systems were shut down to conserve power. The exterior lights were gone, communications down. What did I still have? The emergency strobe. I reached for the protected switch panel and flipped open the safety cover. The strobe would drain what little power remained, potentially cutting my oxygen supply. But without rescue, that oxygen wouldn't matter anyway. Worth the gamble, I muttered, flipping the switch. A warning flashed on the screen. Power critical. Emergency systems compromised. I ignored it and watched the battery percentage drop immediately from 12 to 9%. The strobe would drain everything within the hour, but I only needed minutes. Either they'd see me now, or they wouldn't see me at all. On the sonar, the vessel above me changed course, descending in a direct line toward Curiosity. They'd spotted me. "Yes," I whispered, pressing my palms against the cold console. "Yes. Come on." The first glimmer of external light filtered through my cracked viewport. Just a hint at first, like distant lightning. Then brighter, steadier, growing in intensity, until my small cabin filled with more light than I'd seen in days. I raised my hand to shield my eyes, squinting against the sudden brightness. The rescue vessel came into view, its powerful spotlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating Curiosity like a museum exhibit. It was a modern deep-sea rescue submersible, larger than my vessel, with a reinforced hull and multiple external manipulator arms. The name Pacific Guardian was painted across its side. I pressed my face to the viewport, blinking against tears of relief. After days in darkness, seeing another human-made object felt unreal. The Guardian positioned itself above me, maneuvering slowly, carefully, its thrusters stirring up silt from the seafloor. I watched as one of its mechanical arms extended toward Curiosity. A metallic clank reverberated through the hull, followed by another, and another. Magnetic docking clamps. They were securing themselves to my vessel. The console lights flickered as the connection established a minimal power link. My communications panel lit up, the first system to come back online with the external power assist. A voice crackled through the speaker, distorted but unmistakably human. "Curiosity, this is Pacific Guardian. Do you copy? Dr. Willis, are you receiving?" I lunged for the communications panel, pressing the transmit button with trembling fingers. Yes, I copy. This is Willis." My voice broke. "You have no idea how good it is to hear another person." "Dr. Willis, this is Captain Molly Hernandez. We've established magnetic connection and are beginning emergency extraction procedures. What's your status?" I swallowed, trying to organize my thoughts. Injured but stable. Hull compromised in 3 sections. Power critical, down to emergency reserves only. Oxygen recyclers functioning at minimal capacity. I paused, checking the life support readout. Maybe 2 hours of breathable air left. Understood. We're going to equalize pressure between vessels before attempting hatch access. Stand by. I heard mechanical sounds from above, the rescue vessel adjusting position. My training kicked in, and I knew what would come next. They'd try to create a secure seal between vessels, equalize the pressure, and transfer me through an emergency tube without exposing either vessel to the crushing deep-sea pressure. Minutes passed. The indicator light for external pressure equalization remained red. "Curiosity, we're having trouble establishing a proper seal." Hernandez's voice came through again. "Your hull damage is interfering with standard docking procedures. We're going to try again with adjusted parameters." I checked the structural integrity display. The port side has the least damage. Try connecting there. Adjusting position now. The rescue vessel shifted, sending vibrations through my hull. Another series of metallic sounds followed, and I felt Curiosity being pulled slightly upward. The pressure gauge fluctuated, but then stabilized. The indicator remained red. "No good," Hernandez said, tension evident in her voice. "Dr. Willis, we need to try manual override protocols. Are you familiar with emergency hatch bypass?" "Yes, basic training," I replied, already moving toward the emergency hatch in the ceiling of the cabin. "We'll need your help from inside. I'm sending the procedure to your console now." The communication screen flickered, displaying a series of technical instructions. I scanned them quickly, noting the steps I'd need to take. "Got it," I confirmed, reaching for the emergency toolkit stored beneath the pilot's seat. "Starting manual override sequence now." With the toolkit in hand, I positioned myself beneath the hatch. The procedure required disengaging several safety mechanisms designed to prevent accidental opening, mechanisms that, under normal circumstances, protected against catastrophic decompression. My injured shoulder protested as I strained to reach the access panel. My fingers, still numb from cold, fumbled with the small tools. I dropped a critical hex key, cursing as it clattered into a dark corner of the cabin. "Status update, Dr. Willis," Hernandez's voice prompted. "Working on it," I replied, retrieving the fallen tool. "My hands aren't cooperating well. Cold and injury." "Understood. Take your time. We're secure and have plenty of air on our end." I returned to the hatch, focusing intently on each step. Remove safety cover, disengage primary lock, reset pressure sensors, override warning systems. Each task required precision despite my shaking hands. "Override sequence complete," I finally announced, wiping sweat from my forehead despite the cold. "Ready for your end?" "Initiating final connection sequence," Hernandez responded. "Stand clear of the hatch." I moved back to the pilot's seat, watching the oxygen levels drop below critical thresholds. The cabin air had grown noticeably thinner, making each breath feel insufficient. My head pounded, either from my injury or the beginning of hypoxia. The vessel above me shifted again and I heard new sounds, the unmistakable hiss of hydraulics and the metallic sliding of the emergency transfer tube extending toward my hatch. "Connection attempt in progress," Hernandez updated. "Pressure equalization initiated." I felt it immediately, a subtle shift in the cabin pressure. My ears popped as the pressure differential began to normalize. The sound of air flowing through newly established connections grew louder. "We have seal integrity," Hernandez announced. "Pressure equalization at 60% and climbing." I watched the indicator light above the hatch. Still red, but now blinking slowly, transitioning. 80% equalization, Hernandez continued. 90, 95. The light turned green. "We have full equalization, preparing to open hatch from our side." I heard mechanical clicks from above as the external locks disengaged. Then, slowly, the hatch began to move. It lifted just an inch at first, then more, revealing the bright interior of the transfer tube. A face appeared in the opening, a rescue technician in full gear. "Dr. Willis, we're going to help you out. Are you able to climb?" I stood shakily, realizing how weak I'd become. "I'll need assistance. Injured shoulder, possible concussion, and I haven't eaten much in days." Two technicians descended into Curiosity. They secured a harness around my chest and under my arms, careful of my injured shoulder. "We've got you," one said. "Just relax and let us do the work." They guided me toward the hatch. As I reached it, I suddenly remembered. "Wait," I said, pulling against their support. "The data drives. I need the data drives." The technicians exchanged looks. "Dr. Willis, we need to evacuate you immediately," the first one said. "No, you don't understand. The footage. It's everything." I pointed to the console. The backup drives in the waterproof case. I need them. Captain Hernandez's voice came through the transfer tube. What's the delay? He wants to retrieve some data drives, the technician replied. There was a brief pause before Hernandez responded. Make it quick. Grab what he needs and get him out. One technician maintained his grip on my harness, while the other moved to the console, following my directions to the waterproof case containing the backup drives. Got them, he confirmed, securing the case to his belt. They resumed guiding me up through the hatch. As I emerged into the transfer tube, the brightness and warmth of the rescue vessel overwhelmed my senses after days in the cold, dark Curiosity. The technicians pulled me the rest of the way into Pacific Guardian. As the hatch sealed behind us, I heard the magnetic clamps detaching from my submersible. We were separating from Curiosity. I clutched the data case that the technician had handed to me, holding it against my chest. Inside was the partially corrupted but still revolutionary footage. Proof of what I'd seen, what I'd discovered. Proof that would change everything. I winced as Shannon pressed her fingers against the tender spot above my right eye. 3 days had passed since the Pacific Guardian had pulled me from the depths, but my body still remembered every impact Curiosity had endured. Hold still, Shannon said, shining a penlight into my eyes. Your pupils are responding normally, which is good. But that cut is going to leave a scar. The medical bay of our research vessel was cramped but efficient, stocked with enough equipment to handle most emergencies at sea. I sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath me whenever I shifted position. My shoulder still ached from being thrown across Curiosity's cabin, but the pain had dulled to a manageable throb. Any dizziness? Nausea? Changes in vision? Shannon asked, making notes on her tablet. No, just headaches that come and go. I touched the butterfly bandage on my forehead, and I'm tired, really tired. Shannon nodded as she checked my blood pressure. That's to be expected after what you went through. Prolonged isolation, hypothermia, limited oxygen, and a concussion. Your body needs time to recover. I looked down at my hands, noticing they still trembled slightly. The cold from Curiosity's cabin seemed to have settled into my bones. Even in the climate-controlled medical bay, I couldn't shake the chill. Your blood pressure's still elevated, Shannon said, and your core temperature is slightly below normal. We need to keep monitoring you. I started to protest, but Shannon cut me off with a raised hand. This isn't negotiable, Jordan. You nearly died down there. The door to the medical bay slid open, and Ernest burst in, clutching a tablet to his chest. His face was flushed with excitement, his glasses slightly askew. We got it, he exclaimed, barely containing himself. We managed to recover some of the footage from the damaged drives. Shannon frowned. Ernest, I'm in the middle of an examination. It's okay, I said, sitting up straighter despite the protest from my shoulder. Show me. Ernest approached, his fingers tapping rapidly on the tablet screen. The drives were badly corrupted, but we managed to salvage about 3 minutes of clear footage. It's not continuous, but... He turned the tablet toward me. It's enough. The screen showed the murky depths of the ocean, illuminated by Curiosity's lights. And there it was, the massive shape of the megalodon, its skin a dark silhouette against the lighter water as it circled the whale carcass. The footage jumped, clearly damaged, and then resumed with the megalodon turning toward the camera, its eye visible as it detected my presence. My God, I whispered, watching myself relive the moment of discovery. You can see it clearly. The footage skipped again, this time showing the chaos of the attack, the viewport spinning as Curiosity was struck, the warning lights flashing across the control panel, and my own voice calling out a mayday. Then, briefly but unmistakably, one of the Leviathan appeared, its massive head filling the frame before the footage cut to static. "That's all we've been able to recover so far," Ernest said, taking the tablet back. "But it's enough to confirm everything. The data team is still working on the rest." The door opened again, and Jerome Holland entered. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much since the rescue. "How's our survivor?" he asked, his voice carrying its usual calm authority. "Stubborn," Shannon replied, packing away her medical equipment, "and not following orders to rest." Jerome smiled slightly. "That sounds about right." He turned to me. "I wanted to let you know what happened on our end. When your emergency beacon started transmitting, the signal pattern was unusual, pulsing rather than continuous. Protocol says we wait 6 hours before initiating search procedures for a submersible with your capabilities, but something felt off." "You started looking for me early," I said. Jerome nodded. "I convinced Captain Hernandez to begin search procedures after only 2 hours. If we'd waited the full 6... He didn't need to finish the sentence. I swallowed hard. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The board wants a full investigation into how this happened. They're questioning why you deviated from the planned dive path." Jerome's tone wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. "I found a living megalodon," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And a pod of Livyatan melvillei, 2 species thought extinct for millions of years. I think that answers their question." Jerome's expression changed from professional concern to scientific curiosity. "Tell us what you saw down there. The footage is fragmented, but you were there. You experienced it." I took a deep breath and organized my thoughts. The memories were vivid, seared into my mind by adrenaline and fear. I was conducting the planned survey of the thermal vents when I detected unusual movement on sonar. I adjusted course to investigate and found what appeared to be a whale fall, a decomposing carcass. Circling it was a shark, but the dimensions were all wrong. Too large, too primitive in its morphology. Shannon and Ernest had moved closer, hanging on every word. Jerome leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but attention focused entirely on my account. Its dentition was unmistakable. Triangular serrated teeth arranged in multiple rows, classic megalodon characteristics. The counter shading was perfect for deep water predation, dark above, lighter below. I estimate it was approximately 65 feet in length. "That's larger than any known great white," Shannon said, her voice hushed. "By a factor of 3, I confirmed. Its hunting behavior was systematic, tearing large chunks from the carcass and returning in a circular pattern. When it detected curiosity, its behavior changed instantly. It abandoned feeding and initiated what I can only describe as a territorial defense response. The attack, Jerome said. I nodded. It struck with precision, not random aggression, targeted hits to disable the submersible. It knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage. Ernest was taking notes rapidly on his tablet. Intelligence? Predatory adaptation, I corrected. But yes, a form of situational intelligence. What happened next, though? That's where it gets truly remarkable. I described the arrival of the Livyatan pod, their coordinated hunting strategy, the way they communicated and executed what could only be described as tactical maneuvers. They weren't just hunting as a group, I explained. They were implementing a strategy, some distracting while others positioned for the kill. They targeted vulnerable points on the megalodon's anatomy with precision. The alpha, the largest member, directed the others through what appeared to be complex vocalizations. You recorded these vocalizations? Shannon asked. The external microphones captured everything before the systems failed. The data should be on the drives, if you can recover it. The door opened again, and Captain Molly Hernandez stepped in. She surveyed the impromptu gathering with a raised eyebrow. "I see our patient has visitors," she said. "I hope you're not tiring him out." "Just debriefing," Jerome replied. Molly approached, her posture professional but her expression showing concern. "I've received authorization from headquarters. We'll be staying on site for another week to gather additional data. From a safe distance," she added firmly, looking directly at me. "Define safe," I said. "No submersible dives," she replied without hesitation. "We'll deploy remote sensing equipment only. Sonar arrays, deep water drones, and passive acoustic monitoring." I started to protest, but Molly cut me off. "This isn't negotiable, Dr. Willis. We've already lost one multi-million-dollar submersible. I'm not risking another, or any more lives." Before I could respond, the communication panel on the wall chimed. Molly stepped over and pressed the accept button. The screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of my father, Dr. Jerry Willis. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore his customary bow tie even for a satellite call. "Jordan," he said, his voice carrying through the speakers. "I see you've managed to create quite a stir." "Hello, Father," I replied, straightening involuntarily as I always did in his presence, even via video. "The board has been in emergency session for the past 24 hours, he continued. "Your discovery has significant implications." I noticed he didn't ask how I was feeling or express relief at my survival. That wasn't his way. "We're planning an expanded research expedition," he continued. "Reinforced vessels, additional security measures, and a full scientific team. The preliminary data you've gathered is compelling enough to warrant substantial investment." "How soon?" I asked. 6 weeks, perhaps 8. We need time to modify the equipment properly." He adjusted his bow tie. "In the meantime, I expect comprehensive documentation of everything you observed. The partial footage is causing quite a sensation, but we need more than sensationalism. We need scientific rigor." "I understand," I said. "Good. I'll be arriving next week to oversee the preliminary data analysis personally." The screen went dark as he ended the call without saying goodbye. "That went well," Shannon said dryly. I smiled despite myself. That's his version of, "I'm glad you're alive." Ernest cleared his throat. "Speaking of data analysis, we've been reviewing your notes and the recovered audio files. The vocalizations you mentioned. They're unlike anything we've heard before." He pulled up a spectrogram on his tablet, showing complex waveforms that pulsed and varied in frequency. "These patterns suggest communication far more sophisticated than what we observe in modern cetaceans," he explained. "There are distinct repeating sequences that appear to correlate with specific hunting behaviors." "Language?" I asked. "Maybe not language as we define it," Shannon said, studying the patterns, "but definitely a complex communication system with syntax and contextual variations. Look here." She pointed to a specific pattern. "This sequence repeats just before each coordinated attack maneuver." The implications were staggering. Not only had we discovered living specimens of extinct megafauna, but we'd potentially uncovered evidence of advanced communication among prehistoric marine predators. "I need to document all of this," I said, attempting to stand. My legs wobbled, and Shannon quickly moved to support me. "What you need is rest," she insisted. "I can rest later. This is too important." I steadied myself against the examination table. "I need to start drafting preliminary research papers while everything is fresh in my mind." Shannon looked ready to argue, but Jerome intervened. "Let him work, but in his quarters, not the lab. and with regular check-ins. Shannon reluctantly agreed, and with Ernest's help, I made my way back to my cabin. Over the next few hours, I began organizing my notes into what would become the first draft of a revolutionary paper. Despite the throbbing in my head and the persistent ache in my shoulder, I wrote feverishly, determined to document every detail before memory could blur the experience. Later that evening, I took a break and made my way to the upper deck. The night air was cool against my skin as I approached the viewport. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, dark and mysterious under the moonlight. Somewhere below those calm waters lurked creatures science had declared extinct millions of years ago. I placed my palm against the glass, feeling the slight vibration of the ship beneath my fingers. What I had witnessed would transform marine biology forever. I had seen something no other human had survived to document. A glimpse into a world we had thought lost to time, preserved in the unexplored depths of our own planet.